Hi, my name is Bryan Coleman. I am a design director based out of Denver, Colorado. You can check me out on my website at bryancoleman.com, on Instagram at Bryan the Coleman, and on Twitter at Bryan the Coleman. I work with After Effects, Red Giant, Redshift, Arnold, Octane, X Particles, and most importantly, C4D, which is the foundation for all of my work. Some of my clients include Apple, MPC Frame Store, The Mill, We Are Royale, Swarovski, and Man vs. Machine. I'd like to thank Maxon for bringing me out today to discuss my workflows using C4D, Redshift, and Red Giant for After Effects. A lot of my work leans towards conceptual art for most of my clients, which includes solving creative problems and guiding art direction. You can check me out again on my website, bryancoleman.com, on Instagram, Bryan the Coleman, and on Twitter, Bryan the Coleman. Let's take a look at my demo reel. Thank you. All right, back to where I was, demo reel. So I have been working on some different things lately, I guess, working with some 3D head scanning. I've been using this scanner called an RTEC Leo. I don't have any photos of it, but it's a handheld scanner, really nice scanner. So I've been trying to take it from what is normally an industrial application into a bit more of an artistic application. So these are some of the scans that I have been getting with the RTEC Leo, and these were all rendered out of C4D using Redshift. You can see the one on the top left there is probably one of the coolest ones that I got, the fabrics and the skin and everything. So these are some of the raw ones. So I've been working on a project where we take these head scans and we created an art project that we called Portrayal, and we were creating these customized pieces of artwork for people using their head scans. And then I would mint the head scan, the piece of artwork, to the Ethereum blockchain. And then people would use these as their custom PFPs, LinkedIn, Instagram, that kind of thing. So I've been experimenting with these in Redshift and Cinema. But I've also been doing a little bit of 3D scanning with them. My buddy Scott helped me do some of these 3D scans. So you can tell the quality of the 3D scans I get because the resolution of these prints is kind of insane. So I have also been playing around with Unreal Engine and MetaHuman. And this is one of the MetaHuman scans that I've been playing with in Unreal Engine. I've been using an app on the iPhone called LiveLink, and so this is actually live. This was not recorded. This was live directly into Unreal Engine. So I'm just making a bunch of faces. That's all I really do in this, is just make faces the whole time. But the quality of this is like really insane, and it kind of goes back to the 3D scans that I've been getting from these. Here is another one that I've been working on. Some of you guys might know Handel Eugene. This is a head scan I did of his. This is kind of straight out of MetaHuman. And again, it's the quality of the scan that I've been working with. And a lot of this starts in C4D. So I do the head scan and then take it into C4D and then clean up the geometry, import it into Unreal Engine, bring it into MetaHuman, and then either bring it back into Unreal Engine or just do a lot of like lighting and stuff in MetaHuman, which is really fun. Here's another one of me, which is really hilarious because I would never actually wear these clothes. And I'm also not this skinny. And this dude's like way too flexible. But again, this is all from 3D scanning my head initially, and then kind of the workflow from Cinema 4D to Unreal Engine. But what I'm going to talk about today is a project I created called Escape. And this is what we will be creating today. So we're going to take my 3D head scan and we're going to put it on this body. And then I'll just go through Redshift and Cinema and just show you how I'm lighting this and working on some other things. So the idea for this was I'm generally a pretty happy dude and like to have fun and laugh, as many of you know. But for some reason, all of my artwork tends to be a little dark, I guess. So the idea of this is that there's this form, this human that's sort of emerging or escaping from this liquid, from this thing that's holding it back. So here's what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to use Remesh to simplify a 3D scan. I'm going to use the smooth brush to clean up the rough edges on the model, combine my 3D head scan with the pre-existing 3D body. I will pose the rigged character and then create vertex maps to drive a material placement, sort of like a Lumimat. And then I'm going to use bump maps and displacement maps to create the unique look, and then add lighting to heighten drama. And then finally, I'll show you how to use Redshift render view settings to create a finished look inside of Cinema 4D without doing anything else. So let's go. So here's my raw scan, which I did this maybe like a year ago, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I couldn't tell you why I thought I should do the scan without a shirt on, but nonetheless, I did the scan without a shirt on, and here it is. So the quality of the scan is like pretty insane. You can see a little bit of kind of the volumetrics working. One thing that kind of doesn't work out that well are the eyes. You can see it's a bit more of a texture on there versus the actual eyeballs. So I have done some work where I go in and like really clean it up. But for this purpose today, I am not going to be doing that. I'm going to go into show you the lines so you can see the poly mesh is like kind of insane and it's all triangulated and not exactly even. So for me to work with it, I've been using the Remesh tool, and I am just going to show you my settings. I'm not going to do it because it's going to take a long time, even on a very fast machine. It works great. But what I usually do on this, just to reduce the mesh, is take it down like 5%. That's the only thing I'm changing in this. I love this. I love this tool. So here is what the Remesh looks like once I'm done with it. It took maybe a few minutes. Like it doesn't take forever. One thing that's really cool about the Remesh, though, is that you can go in here and take some splines and draw these splines around the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and that will give you more detail in those areas. And I have done that with some of my other stuff, but I didn't need to do that with what I'm doing today. One of the things that kind of became a problem when I remeshed is that I was getting some geometry here on the nose that wasn't working that well. You can also see that the scan is such a high detail that I'm getting imperfections in my skin, and even I think some of my beard, when I had that beard, was getting in there. So what I end up doing here is just going into my mesh, make sure that you have the mesh selected. Go into the mesh settings, go to brushes to smooth, and then put your cursor over it, and then right click or middle mouse click, and then I can just drag left and right to increase the size of it, or up and down to increase or decrease the pressure. So I just kind of go in here and just kind of smooth some of this stuff out, even right here around the nose, just like really quickly. Just go in and kind of bring that down, maybe around the eyes a little bit. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy, just enough to smooth it out a touch. So let's copy this, Control-C on a PC, and I'm going to bring it into this other scene. So I have this androgynous human male figure here in T-pose, and I'm going to essentially combine my head with this figure and then essentially create my piece of art that's customized to me because of my 3D head scan. So the first thing we want to do is just kind of get this thing in place. So Let's just kind of drag it down here, line it up. This isn't going to be perfect, but I am just going to try to get everything lined up. I'm just kind of giving you guys a rough overview of stuff. And let's go in here, make sure I got it lined up as best I can. So that seems pretty good. So that's pretty good. I'll probably make a few adjustments here and there, but I think right now that's probably pretty good. So what I want to do is I just want to start to remove parts of this male form and take the head off basically and kind of put my head in. So let's go ahead and go into my point mode, grab my lasso tool, and just kind of remove the head here. Just take that off. There's my head starting to pop out. And then let's go back to my head and start to kind of remove some of these points. Anything that's maybe sticking out that I don't want to be a part of the final product, something like that. I'm just kind of doing a generalized sort of generic version of this right now, just to kind of show you guys the process. And let's go back to object mode. Excuse me, let's do my head. Bring that back. Just kind of get it into place. It doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to use a Redshift material to kind of cover all this stuff. But I will use the smooth tool to sort of smooth these things out. So again, I got my smooth tool, middle mouse, left or right to make it bigger or smaller, and just kind of smooth this out a little bit. Just kind of get it in place. Again, doesn't have to be totally perfect. For this project, I did spend a little bit more time on it, but right now I'm just kind of getting the general idea in place for you guys. So that's sort of it. That's kind of where I took it. So now from this point, I actually took it into Mixamo, and Mixamo Adobe rigged it for me. I'm sure there's probably a million other options out there. This is just my workflow, and this is just how I did it. So the next thing that I want to do with this rigged character now is start to just put it into that form where, again, it's kind of emerging or trying to escape from that liquid. So let's create a plane. And let's put on plus Z. Let's make it massive here. Let's make it really big. Something like that. All right. So I have this skeleton rig here, and I'm just going to go through and essentially curate this character, pose them into position. So we're getting like Rose on the Titanic right now, but let's keep working with it and just slowly bend and curate this thing into place. To kind of get that nice arch. And, I sort of had to like mimic this just like they do in, like movies where they're animating characters, just like really mimic like what you're doing. And so I was posing myself in these positions just to kind of get the feeling of what that could be like. All right, now we're definitely looking like Rose on the Titanic. All right, so this is kind of the general idea. So I just slowly go through this bit by bit and start to kind of manipulate some of these things. Try to get that expression in there. Maybe even mess with the head a little bit. Start to go down the shoulders. So again, the idea is that the chest is sort of coming out first. The arms are maybe being like left behind a little bit. So you just want to slowly pose this thing into place. Go down each part of it. Go into my elbow here. Pull this thing forward. Even rotate the elbow a little bit. This is such a great rig. I love this thing. And I do use Mixamo. Again, there's probably a lot of other options out there that you guys might go with, but this is just one that I use, and it works really well for my purposes. So I'm just going to kind of get a general idea of this in place for you, just so you can see my workflow. So again, we're kind of getting this figure now, this character, like he's kind of moving his way out of this liquid, sort of struggling to get through. The other thing that I kind of had to do was like, if you open your hand like really wide, like splay your fingers apart, what does that look like? Like how do you get that feeling that it's like really struggling? So I spent a lot of time on this, probably like way too much time initially. And you kind of the idea is that you want to just sort of like open all these things up create that tension. Just kind of slowly bend these things into place. So I'm not going to show you everything that I did here, but this is kind of the general idea of it because I kind of want to get into sort of the fun stuff, which is a bit more of the material. So this is kind of the general idea. Combine these things, took it into Mixamo, got my T-pose, got my skeleton, start to pose it. The next thing I want to do is just start to build everything out with the material. So this is my finished pose here, which you can see I definitely spent a lot more time. You got that thrusting of the chest forward, the arms are a little left behind, the head is kind of looking up in this dramatic pose. So let's start to create some materials. And I work in the old espresso node material. I haven't quite adopted the new one yet, but I know there's a lot of you out there who are just like me. So let's go to Redshift, Material, and Standard. And let's start to build this material out. First thing I want to do is just put a camera in place so that we can just kind of start to get this whole thing. So I'm going to put my perspective, my default camera right here, and then I'm going to do Shift-C and type RS camera and get a Redshift camera. Let's make sure that we are looking through it. I like to decrease the angle of view, the focal length. I probably put this down maybe around like 20. And let's just kind of move this camera around, even rotate it just a little bit. Maybe something like this, something like that. So again, here's very dramatic pose. This figure's like looking north. So let's create a protection tag. So again, Shift-C, I like where everything's sitting. I don't want it to move. And then let's go into a perspective mode, my default camera, and then let's just leave the camera that we just created in place. I'm gonna open up my Redshift render view, and then I work with it a little bit like this, drag some things around. Actually, let's just do this to make it easy. Something like this. I have my own customized settings at home, but I don't have them right here. All right, so I did turn my default camera off. I always turn it off. I don't know why. I just don't want to see it. So let's create a dome light and start to create the material and start to light this thing. So I usually use like a dome light just to kind of get an idea of what I'm looking at, even though I'm eventually going to create a little bit better lighting setup. So let's double click and go into my material node here. I can even drag this over a little bit. And let's create a new texture. And then let's find that texture, which I'm probably gonna have to go through some stuff here. Should have done this in the first place. Texture, and then I'm just gonna grab this texture that I have right here. And then let's drag that into my base color. And you can see pretty quickly that what's happening here is my vertex, my UVs are like all messed up, but that's okay. I can fix that because I'm going to use a camera projection to make this work. So let's create a new camera. I'll just type in Shift-C, RS, camera, and let's call this projection main. And then on my material tag here where it says projection, change that from UV mapping to camera mapping, and then drag that projection main camera in. My texture that I'm using is 16:9, so let's change the camera to HD TV 16:9. And then I'm gonna get out of my material here. Let's go into my perspective mode, cameras, use camera, and then let's use that projection main. Make sure that we are looking through that. What happens if I start to drag this around? Here we go. So right now I just want to start to place this texture so that it looks like this body, this figure is kind of escaping with sort of this texture kind of encompassing the entire thing. So this is going to kind of be like a broad overview just to get a nice placement of everything. One thing that you'll see over here is that my texture needs to be mirrored. So go into the texture itself, go into the texture node, and turn on mirror U and mirror V, and you can see that it's now mirroring that, so it just kind of slowly drifts away off to the side. I think I might rotate this a little bit. I think I maybe did like minus 55 or something like that, and just kind of place it. So we get sort of this nice generalized feel. Maybe even take us down like minus 25 or something there. I think that works. So again, this is just a very generalized texture. So it looks like this figure is coming out of the liquid, but one thing that you will notice here is that there's just not as much detail on the hands, the head, maybe even the body. So I'm going to show you a few ways to do this, which I'm going to create essentially like a Lumimat on the hand, on the head, and on the body. And we're going to use camera mapping to put our materials directly on that just to create a little bit more detail. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that I am not in my projection main camera. Go to default camera, zoom in onto this hand, and there are a few ways to do this. I'm going to show you like two, but there's a few ways to do this. So let's make sure that we have the body selected. Go into point mode. I'm going to deselect this because it saved my selection. Grab my lasso tool and just drag a circle kind of around the hand and a little bit of the wrist. And then let's store that as a selection. And then let's call that selection, point selection, right hand. And then go back into your object mode, click your mesh, the body there, go into tags, choose other vertex map. And initially your paint tool is going to come up, but you want to just select that tag. And let's just call this vertex map right hand. And then underneath fields here, say use fields, and then there's a default of freeze, delete that, and then take that vertex map that we just created and drag it in there. And now we have this vertex map that is directly associated with the point selection. So I can actually create new point selections, update it, and it'll update on here. One problem that you do see on here though is that we have a little bit of jaggedness on that selection. So if you go to click on the point selection in the fields, go to mode, and instead of nearest, use average. This always takes a second because the default is 50, but I like to take it down to like 25. See if I can get this thing to update real quick. Probably have too many things going on at the same time. Let's turn that off. And let's take this down maybe like 25. Let's see if it'll update for me. There we go. So you can see now that this, my selection here, let's get out of that. Why are you still doing that? All right, you're dragging on me, man. All right, so I've got my hand selected here. This is not doing anything. There we go. All right. So you can see, I'm not going to zoom out too much anymore, but you can see we got a nice gradient here. So I will just deselect that, get off of that. I'm going to go into my material now, go into the edit shader graph, and then let's start to set up our material just a little bit further. I'm not sure why this is dragging so slowly right now. So let's go into, let's type in C4D vertex, and we're going to grab this C4D vertex map, and then drag and drop our newly created vertex map over here. And then let's create a camera map node as well. So I am going to, I'm so sorry, this is like lagging big time right now. Let's take our projection main. I'm going to control drag, and let's call this one. This is not letting me do anything. How can I get around this? Projection, let's do right hand. And let's pull this out a little bit underneath camera here. So with my camera map node selected, Let's drag the projection right hand and put that in the camera picker right here. Let's create a new node, the color layer node. All right, so let's take my camera map node and drag it into my layer 1 color. And for the vertex map, let's drag that into my layer 1 mask. And then let's connect that to the output here so we can kind of see what's going on. Close out of this. Let's grab our Redshift render view. Click play. So now you can see that we are going to, wait, what did I do here? Did I choose that properly? Let's go into the material itself. Click on that. Grab my vertex map. Yes. Camera map. That's working. Oh, I don't have a material in here. Well, that's why. And let's go and grab that material again. Put that in there. Let's close out of this. And now we can kind of see that we have that texture located directly on that hand right there. So let's go into camera and use that right hand, and we can just kind of, man, this is slow. I'm sorry, I can't do anything right now. All right, so I'm going to kind of just use the camera in here a little bit. Zoom in. Sorry, this is not quite working. All right, everything is updating very slowly here. But you can see what I'm trying to do is just try to get my material to be a little bit more detailed directly on that hand right there. All right. Let's go back into the material itself. Let's double click. Getting a lot of lag. Like I almost can't work. Yeah. All right, so let's take my main texture here and go into the base color, and then let's take that color layer node and drop it into the standard material base color, and then pull that over into my output so that we can start to see what's going on. So now we can see that we've got a little bit more detail on this hand here versus the generalized overall texture that we had before. Maybe let's just see if I can kind of pull this over. It's possible that my vertex map is causing this, and if that is the case, I might just delete it so that I can get through the rest of my stuff here. But you can see the detail that I'm getting now on the hand, which is starting to look really good. Let's go back into my material and start to build out another option of doing this. So let's create a C4D shader node. And let's create a gradient out of this. And then let's grab a texture node, pull that in, connect my C4D shader into my texture here. And then let's just apply that to the output just so you can kind of see what I'm going to do here. So essentially, again, I'm kind of creating like a Luma mat. I'm going to do that for the head on this one. So with the C4D shader, on the gradient, let's just click that gradient and wait for it to pop up over here. Let's change this from type to 2D circular. And I want to crush this down. So let's invert the gradient, and then let's drag my cursor over. Let's grab this black one, pull it down to really tighten up that circle. So I'll go over here to my render view real fast. Let it update. So now you can see that we've got this little highlight kind of on the chest. So what I can do with my Redshift texture node here is just kind of drag this over, though at this point I'm not sure it's even going to let me do that. let's just type some numbers in. Maybe that'll make it work a little bit better. 0.5. Let's see, too much. 0.1. Something like that. All right. All right, let's try this. I'm going to delete that vertex map. I want to see if this is causing the problem because I noticed that it does slow things down a little bit. That may have actually been the problem. Double click, edit shader graph. That's 100% what was going on there. And then let's just kind of move that into place. So now I'm using a different technique here, which just kind of depends on the situation. There's a bunch of options to do this, but essentially I'm just kind of creating like this vertex map, this gradient, which acts as a bit of a luminamat so that I can kind of place this texture on there as I wanted to. So let's put this texture. So now we have this luminamat, and let's go plug that into the color layer. Let's go into the layer 3 mask. And then let's create a Cameron map node and drag that into the color layer, layer 3 color. And then let's choose that texture one more time. Go in here, grab that texture one more time. And I have not designated the camera yet. So let's just call this projection head. And then with my camera map node selected, down here where it says camera picker, let's just drag and drop that in there. Close this out and to edit shader graph. And then let's drag that into the space. Already is standard material output. And now I can take my projection head camera, go into the camera, projection head, and start to just place this thing as we need it to. And you can see now that I deleted that vertex map, camera projection head, let's go through this. I'm like a little thrown off that. Go back into my material. All right, so this is a point where I need to organize myself because once things start to not work, I got to figure out how to make them work. Oh, because I needed to choose enable layer 3. So I'm using the layer 3 mask and layer 3 color, and I have to enable it to make it work. So now if I just drag this around, you can see that I'm now applying that color directly to the face, which is really cool. Just for time's sake, I might delete the vertex map that I was originally using. What does that do for me? Base color texture. Let's just plug this back into the layer 3 color and see if this maybe will fix what I just did. All right. Let's work through this. Let's just go back because it was working, right? All right. Here we go. So I'm going to leave that. Obviously, I was having a problem with my vertex map. It seems to chew up a lot of the memory. Not sure why. But the next thing that I can do is I'm gonna change my plan a little bit. I'm gonna change it up a little bit. So I'm gonna do some more stuff on the body here, but I'm gonna use the luminamat that I was using kind of with the gradient. So let's do that technique. For time's sake, I would probably sit here and try to figure out why it's taking so much of my making things slow down so much. But let's just do this. Let's just duplicate this entire thing. So I'm gonna select everything. Control drag, and so now I have this whole thing duplicated. Let's take this into the layer 4 mask, and then let's put this in layer 4 color, and then make sure that I have layer 4 enabled, and then just to see what I'm working with right here, let's take that gradient that I was using for the head, and we're going to put that on the body now so you can see it's on the head. So let's just move this down. I'll just kind of put this sort of generally over the body here, maybe move it over, maybe even grab the gradient itself and make it a little bit larger. I do a lot of times increase this to like 1024 just to make my resolution size a little bit bigger. I'm just going to kind of increase this a little bit just to kind of get the body. Doesn't have to be totally perfect, but I think that's working. So with my camera map selected here, let's create a new one. And so I'm going to select my projection head. I'm going to duplicate it by control dragging and call this body. And then with my camera map selected, drag and drop my projection body into that. Close out of my material here, reconnect it first. And we'll be able to see here that I've got a little bit more control over where it's hitting on the body. So let's choose camera projection body. And you can see now that where I essentially created that Luma mat now is on the body. So I can just kind of finesse this a little bit, and it's kind of cool because you're kind of getting those streaks, like there's a lot of liquid on top, right? And it's kind of like trailing off on the side of the body. That's pretty sweet. So that's pretty good. So that's mostly the material setup. So let's start to get into a little bit more of the lighting now. So I'm going to delete the dome light, and I'm going to go create a area light. Drag this over. Let's make sure that, so I'm in perspective mode, and make sure that you're in the default camera, because a lot of times I make a big mistake and I start moving all my cameras around, not really realizing that I'm changing everything I just set up. Let's pull my light out. Let's just rotate it by like 90 degrees. And so we're going to try to create this sort of dramatic light. So this figure is emerging. It's coming out of this liquid. It's trying to escape, and it's kind of looking up as though there's this sort of light source, like it's kind of being born in a sense. So let's just start to get this dramatic lighting in place. So I'll just turn the intensity of things down a little bit, just so that I'm sort of getting like highlights on top of the face, kind of on the chest, maybe even a little bit on the hands. I come down to the spread. This is one thing I really like about Redshift, is I can kind of increase or decrease the spread on it to make it a little bit more tight in certain areas, versus being a little bit too broad in some areas. So I'm going to take this down, maybe even take the lighting down to like 12 or something like that. So this is starting to look pretty cool because you get some of this really nice lighting on the head, chest, hands, and then let's create a few more lights and set this up, and then we'll keep working on the material. So I'm going to rotate this thing by like 90 degrees, kind of drag it down. And one thing I really like to do with my lighting is I like to use the lighting as a camera. So with that area light selected, go into cameras, use camera, and then I say select object as camera. So now I can kind of come in here and start to place this thing. What I'm trying to do in this moment is, let's undo the rotation here, 90 degrees. Let's undo that. And what I'm trying to do is create just a little bit of an edge right here with lighting, just a little something along that edge. So I'm going to kind of get a little bit closer here. Maybe even rotate this a little bit, try to pull that out. Get out of that camera, go to the default camera, and let's just manipulate this so that it's more tall than it is wide. So you can see I'm starting to get that little hint, that little light along the edge over there, which is starting to look pretty cool. Maybe even rotate this a little. There we go. Look at that. So that's really cool. So I want to increase the spread on this a little bit, I think. Just maybe decrease it. Maybe even pull it out a little bit. Just kind of working my way through this. Every time I do this, I've done this a few times, and every time I do it, I get a little bit of a different look. Let's duplicate that light, and let's bring it over to the other side and rotate it around. So I'm trying to make the main light be the one that's overhead, but it's not giving me as much detail as I really want. So I'm just trying to add a little bit more light on these other sides, but just a little hint. So I might take this down to like 2. So you can see I'm starting to get just a little bit of light over here. I got a nice edge over here. I've got that top-down light working, so this is starting to look really good. I'm gonna go in and select, I'm gonna duplicate this light. And one thing I'm kind of missing right here is that light that's right here on this edge. So let's go into this new light that I just created, go select objects as camera, and then slowly come in here and kind of manipulate it. So a lot of my work, I'm like really refining the light, just like really going in, just kind of like figuring out like how do I see the little details, the little pieces. And I'm just going through a little bit at a time, slowly working it, caressing it, being gentle with it, all the things that you have to do to have a good relationship with those around you. So I think the lighting is starting to look pretty good. Let's start to get into a bit more of the material here because everything is a little too glossy. So now I'm just going to kind of focus on making some of this stuff. So I've got my texture mostly built here, but it's a little too glossy. So let's just start to kind of fill this out. Let's create a ramp node, drag that in, and connect my color layer to the ramp node. And I'm going to show you what I'm working with here and what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to create a bump map on this, and I'm going to use this also as a bit of like a roughness map. And you can see any areas that are white right here with the bump map are going to come forward. Any areas that are dark are not going to have a whole lot of bump. With the roughness map, anything that's white is going to be more rough. Anything that's black is not going to be very rough. So let's pull this into the roughness first. So I'm going to go into base properties, reflection, roughness, and let's pull this out over here and plug that in. So you can see now that I've got some areas that are rough that are not reflective, some areas that are reflective, and the cool thing that I do with this is I can maybe even like I don't want anything to be like perfectly reflective. So I'll just take my gradient here where it's black and just kind of drag this over. So you can see like right here, it starts to get a little bit more rough. So just everything kind of across the board. I mean, it is liquid, so I guess you could have some areas that are maybe a little bit more smooth, but I want to add some texture to this. So let's create a bump node or a bump map. And let's duplicate this ramp. So I'm going to do a control, click it, drag it, control, click it, drag it, plug it into the input, go into the texture input of this bump map, and then plug my bump map into my standard material geometry bump input. And you can see that we're starting to get a little bit more detail kind of in here. So what I could do maybe is like increase the height scale to maybe like 2. So you can see some of the detail that I'm getting from those textures. So it's starting to feel a little bit better there. And some other stuff I want to start to do here is maybe add a displacement map. And the displacement map is really where things start to really come together. So let's create a new displacement map node, and let's just duplicate that ramp like one more time. And then with my color layer node here, connect it to the ramp, and then drag that in. You guys, anybody who uses the new material node editor is probably like, this is why you use it, because you can just like automatically click it together. But alas, I like to make it more difficult on myself. Plug that into the displacement map, and then with the displacement map node, plug that into the output displacement. That is not going to do anything offhand because you have to add a Redshift object to it. And let's go to the geometry tab, go to override. Under tessellation, I'm probably going to enable that, though it might slow things down a little bit. And then under displacement, let's maybe turn this up to like 2 and maybe turn the maximum displacement to like 10 or something like that. As you can see, we're starting to get some like really interesting details in here. One thing that I started to mess around with on this though is that any areas that are white are going to come forward, and I don't know why it didn't look quite right to me when I did that. So I actually so I have the bump come forward, and then I have the displacement go backward. So any areas that are white are kind of recede in space a little bit. So you start to get some like really interesting stuff going on. And the geometry even like thins out a little bit, kind of depending on where you're at. Maybe just crank this up to like -5 or something like that. Just see what happens. Look at all that detail. That shit's wild. Pardon the language. But that starts to look really, really good. All right, so I'm going to play around with now, trying to get some of the coloration in place. So I don't know if you guys know Barton Damer, but I kind of got this from him, where I try to do everything in Redshift now inside of Cinema as much as I can, so that I don't have to do quite as much in After Effects. So let's go into my Redshift render view, and now I'm just going to kind of play around with this. I mostly got the material in place. You could add some details to it. You could add, some more noise out here. Maybe even play with the lighting a little bit more, and I might do that. But right now, let's turn my displacement off. So go back to geometry. Displacement definitely slows things down. Tessellation does too. Turn off the override, and then go into view and settings. I'll try to make this as big as possible so you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to turn on bloom. Let's turn this on. So any areas that are white, you're going to kind of see a little bit of this little haze kind of appear. So it's definitely a little fine, but you can see I'm starting to get a little bit of detail, like a little diffuse, kind of playing around here on this face. I can increase or decrease it a little bit. I can make it softer or sharper, and I might just kind of go down this direction. It's just to kind of get that dreamlike state, because when everything is like too hard, too harsh, it just doesn't feel right. Because naturally, if you're like looking at light, looking at a hint of something, like your eyes naturally start to kind of bloom things out, make it a little bit blurry. I might even add like a little bit of, not flare, but streak in here. Maybe just increase that so you can see I'm starting to get this really nice streak across here. The streak number, I changed that to 1. Maybe the intensity is like a little high. I just want like a little something, try to just make it a little dreamy, something like that. So that's starting to look like pretty cool. The other thing that I think is really interesting about this is that you can do bokeh, like depth of field, directly in these settings. Versus having to do it in the camera. So I'm going to drag this off of here just a little bit. Let's go in my perspective mode, default camera, and let's choose my master light, which is right here. And let's just so you could do this a few ways. I'll just do it. I'll show you a couple ways to do this. Go into optical, and then underneath depth of field, do the focus distance here, and just choose something like right here on the face, so you can see it change where my focal length is going to be, and like where everything in focus is going to be. Go in here to bokeh, and I just want to grab this number. So I think it's like 1500 something. Let's just put that in. Let's just type it in manually. 1558. And then let's turn things up. Let's just turn things up a little bit and start to get some interesting depth of field. So it's pretty cool. I'm doing this all in the render without having to do it in the camera. Like, it's all in the render settings. That's pretty cool to me. So I try to do this as much as I can. So I think, let's leave this. I don't want to mess with that. Let's just decrease the radius. I don't want it to be quite as blurry. Maybe the power is a little bit less. It's like a little bit too blurry. And then the aspect ratio, I just always like to kind of turn it down, kind of get that anamorphic lens feeling to it. And then I might start to just kind of play around with some of the color controls here. So let's turn that on. Let's delete this point. So now I can like really start to kind of like play around with some of these things. Maybe just bring the darkness up a little bit so it's not like totally dark. Maybe I just kind of crush these values on there a little bit just to kind of create a little bit more detail in there. So this is all starting to look like pretty good. And then the other thing I really like to do, because I use After Effects to comp a lot, and I'm always using Magic Bullet looks, but I can do it. No, all right. Well, that's classic. Well, I can't do it in here right now. However, Magic Bullet looks in camera is like pretty cool. So let's take a look at what this is going to look like. So let's turn our geometry default stuff back on. So we have this really interesting, unique lighting thing going on. We get some nice depth of field. It's probably a little too much depth of field. I'll just turn this down a little bit. I got a little bit of time. I want to light this a little bit better. So let's turn off the bokeh. Let's turn off the geometry override. Let's go into my default camera here. Let's grab, what light is that? So it's this light right here. Let's maybe crank the intensity up to like 5, something like that. And let's just maybe like pull it out of the wall a little bit. And just try to like focus it a little bit more on the hand. So now we have this like really badass glow happening right on the edges right there. Maybe just turn it down a touch. Maybe it's just like a little bit too bright. Something like that. Maybe increase the diffusion a touch here. So now we have this nice edge along here. Maybe I'll just light this while I have a little bit more time. Go into the camera, select object as camera. And let's just kind of zoom in here to the other hand a little bit. And just kind of get in there. Go back into my Redshift render view, hit play. So now we have like this nice light that's lighting both hands, this nice dramatic thing. You can kind of see where my vertex map was giving me a little bit of trouble earlier. If I had a little more time, I could probably problem solve that with you guys. And let's take a look at everything that we've done so far. So I've got this really nice lighting on top, very dramatic. This figure is emerging. I've got my displacement map causing these like really crazy lines. You can see, since I inverted my displacement map, you can see that it's made the hand a little bit smaller. So I'd probably go in and finesse that a little bit, but it's also a little bit cool. Like maybe the liquid hasn't quite formed the hand yet is also kind of a way of looking at it. But all in, I think that's looking pretty cool. So let's just go over a little bit of what we have done. All right. So what we did today is we used a remesh to simplify the 3D scan. We used the smooth brush tool to clean up some of the rough edges on the model. We combined my 3D head scan with the pre-existing 3D body. We posed a rigged character from Mixamo. We created vertex maps to drive a material placement. As you guys remember, it was kind of slowing things down a little bit. Not totally sure why. I might go over to the machine if you guys have questions and kind of work with that. I used bump maps and displacement maps to create a unique look. I added lighting to heighten the drama. And finally, I showed you how to use the Redshift render view settings to create a finished look inside of C4D. So once again, my name is Bryan Coleman. I am a design director based out of Denver, Colorado. You can check me out on bryancoleman.com, on Instagram at Bryan the Coleman, and on Twitter at Bryan the Coleman. And that's it. Thank you.